Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Thrive Innovation Series here from Silicon Valley. I'm John Hartnett, CEO and founder of SVG Ventures and Thrive. We're an innovation and investment platform advancing the future of agriculture through innovation. And I'm delighted to be joined here today by Bob Reiter, Head of Crop Science R&D at Bayer, for a fireside chat on farming our way to a sustainable future. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, John. I think the only thing missing is the fire and the fireside. You know, we're living in a little different time right now, aren't we?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've got lots of fire outside here in California at the moment, so hopefully it's not too much. Maybe the next slide, I'd like to welcome everybody. If you'd like to join in the conversation in terms of either following us or sharing some of the information that you're going to receive this morning, please join the conversation. And next slide. We've focused the webinar series on the future of food, the supply chain from field to fork, as well as addressing the challenges of feeding a growing population in a sustainable way, and while driving and dealing with the climate change challenges, as well as the impact of the current global pandemic that we're all feeling today. We've been discussing key trends and technologies and solutions across the agri-food industry with some of the top CEOs, innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders of R&D like Bob, today. We were honored to have Secretary Perdue speak with us in June, and we continue to work with them in terms of the innovation agenda. And next month, we'll have our innovation, our demo day, and then also we'll have the autonomous acre and robotics in the 21st century on October 15th. So please make sure to register and join us for those. Next slide, Jess. We'll host our Thrive Demo Day on September 24th. This is in partnership with Forbes. We have normally held this in the Forbes AgTech Summit in Salinas in June. And this year we're doing it webinar style. And we have selected 13 amazing agri-food startups from around the world earlier this year who have just completed our 4-month program. And you can see them pitch live at our demo day. And if you're interested in joining, please log on to our website to join us. Next slide. Our Thrive Accelerator was voted #1 agri-food accelerator in the world last year at the World Agri-Food Summit by AgFunder. We've had some incredible success stories from the past 6 years. These companies have created almost $1 billion in value since we started. And next slide, we're delighted to launch Thrive 7. Any early stage startups from around the world, if you're interested in participating in the #1 accelerator, please apply now. You can get the details here, or you can go onto our website to apply. Next slide. We've also launched the Thrive Global Challenges for more scale-up companies, growth stage companies that are making an impact in terms of supporting either the USDA goals and also the SDG goals. Some of the key focus areas for us is around food safety, sustainability, supply chain efficiency, productivity, and health and nutrition. If you'd like to get involved in that as a scale-up corporate or an investor, please, you can learn more about that from our website. Our next slide. We've been working with some of the biggest leaders in the industry, and we're delighted to be working with them to accelerate their innovation strategies and accelerating growth, for these companies. And on our next slide, we've had quite an international audience here today. I think we've got somewhere in the order of 59% from the US and 41% international. And I think we've got people from over 55 countries and quite a diverse range from folks from the agriculture sector to startups, scale-ups, major corporations. So I'd like to welcome everybody today and looking forward to a great conversation. Next slide, Jess. We'll launch 2 polls now. You can take a look at them. We're going to have 2 questions, one around sustainability and one around innovation. So if you'd like to start voting on those, please do, and we'll come back and we'll review those later on. And on the next slide, if you'd like to submit questions for our Q&A that we will do later, you can do that now. And if there's anybody that wants to upvote other votes, it'll get those votes up to the or those questions up to the top, so that we can address the most interesting ones that you'd like to do. So next slide. So Bayer is shaping agriculture through innovation, and the leader that's making this happen is Bob Reiter, who's head of R&D and member of the executive leadership team. Bob is based in Mannheim, Germany, but he's currently based in St. Louis. Bob oversees the crop science research and development pipeline at Bayer as global head of R&D. He leads thousands of scientists in the creation of world-class agricultural solutions with the goal of providing healthy food to a hungry planet. Bob studied horticulture in Penn State, got his master's in science and a doctorate in plant breeding and plant genetics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which has resulted in nearly 30 years of experience in discovering, developing, and delivering innovative R&D solutions in crop science. Of course, he's analytical, but I also heard he's a real empathetic leader. So welcome, Bob, and I'll hand it over to you. Give us an overview of what's going on at Bayer.
All right. Well, John, thank you so much first for the invitation and the opportunity to spend a bit of time with you and the audience, and maybe a little bit of reflection on where we are, I would say, at this point in time in agriculture. I guess one of the upsides of being 30 years in this space is I've seen a lot, right? So I started my career at a time before the introduction of GMOs. I witnessed and was a participant in the use of that technology and how it's impacted agriculture. And now I think we're in another point in time and another inflection point, I think, in where agriculture is headed. So, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about that. So maybe if we just go to the next slide. Just as a brief background for those of you who aren't maybe as familiar with Bayer Crop Science and who we are the pretty much the largest input provider in the space. We sometimes spar a little bit over this question with Syngenta, but with their coming together with ChemChina and recently and Sinochem, they have a fairly large nutrition fertilizer business. So if we exclude that and we kind of talk what we more traditionally think of inputs, we're significantly the largest player in the space. I have roughly 7,000 people in the R&D organization that are fully committed to really helping farmer customers be successful around the world. And as you'll see in the next slide, we can kind of go to the next slide. I think what's really unique about what Bayer can bring to agriculture and help in this space is the fact that we have such tremendous competencies really in what I would say 3 core areas. So we have tremendous capabilities in breeding across a number of different row crops and vegetable seeds. Obviously, because of the legacy Monsanto business, we are well known for our capabilities and our efforts in biotechnology and many of the products that farmers use around the world in some of the key row crops. But then we have, together with that, we have this incredible crop protection capability as well, where we're driving innovation in the crop protection space with new and innovative chemistries and insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides. And we complement that with our efforts in biologicals. And then finally, I think the piece that for me is still one that will have a very significant impression on ag, but is still, I would still say, in a phase of advancing and developing, which is the digital side. And it's impactful, and we'll talk more about this later. It's not just its impact on the farm itself, but it's fundamentally also reshaping how we do research and development in agriculture as well. So the digital piece, I think, is still one of the big frontiers to come, and I'm sure you've heard that from some of your previous participants that you've had as well. So a big area I still am very bullish on in terms of its potential and impact. And I think we're still just scratching the surface of how it can help our farmer customers and just more generally how it helps society in terms of food production globally. So if you go to the next slide, I think, and for me is this is maybe the one of the big fundamental shifts that I kind of see that is now beginning to take, I would say, more of a firm grip in agriculture, which is, you know, even if you look, I was just reading the latest WAYS report on, you know, what's the agricultural outlook through 2050 with this growing population. And I think many of you who've been around for a little while at least reflect on that. I would say 5, 10 years ago, what we were talking about in ag is how in the world are we going to feed 10 billion people? And I think that the tone of that conversation, while that's still critical, I would say, for what agriculture needs to deliver on a global basis over the next decades, I think what is starting to shape and shift really is the criticality of how we produce that food and the importance that society is placing on that, the impact that agriculture can have on climate change in a positive way. And then also, I think, a reflection that agriculture, and this is, I think, reflected in your earlier slide, John, where you showed all the countries participating, the vast diversity that agriculture represents and the criticality that it represents in every single country around the world, because food is such a critical part of society and who we are and how we live. And so smallholders is also, I would say, more at the center of these conversations as well. And so at Bayer, you know, we've been very specific in terms of how we think we can shape agriculture through some of these commitments that you see on the screen. And even more broadly, Bayer as a company is targeting to be basically a zero carbon emitter by 2030 as a broad-based company. And most of that contribution is going to have to come from the agricultural division itself. So, you know, I think this is really, I would say, the shift that I see that's taking place, the shift away from so much focus on production and more toward a focus on how we produce and how we can do that differently. And I know a lot of the people on the line today, I'm sure, particularly in the startup innovation space, are working on technologies and solutions that fit very well against this paradigm. And then maybe we'll go to the last slide. You know, I'm a foundational believer, and we at Bayer are very firm in our belief that we don't solve, as big as we are and as capable as we are with the capabilities we have, we don't and cannot solve these things on our own. And we want to have partners and we need help. And we're very committed to the idea of collaborations and partnerships and investments that help to move agriculture forward and help to move what we're trying to do in a collaborative way. And so, you know, you can see just a small handful of the various collaborations or investments that we have going on, and some of the ways that we're investing in the agricultural startup space to help fuel some of the innovation that we still see is needed in order to really deliver on some of the objectives that we have as a company. And I think more broadly in terms of, I think, what agriculture needs to contribute to society, both in terms of just pure food production and then toward the sustainability goals. So maybe with that, I'll go ahead and stop, John, and then maybe we can kind of go to a little bit of the chat and then take it with some questions.
Okay, I light up the fire here, Bob. Obviously, you know, sustainability is a big headline for all of us, and you know, in your theme, farming our way to sustainable future is really a great goal and a key focus for us globally. You know, there's lots of things we can do across this area. I mean, the word sustainability just covers the whole gambit. In your view, what would you say is kind of going to be the biggest impact for, you know, the next decade? And also maybe give us a little peek into, we see you're doing something in Singapore with the vertical farming area, and I know you're doing something on the Bayer Carbon Initiative. So just love to learn a little bit about those and just your view on kind of the silver bullet for sustainability.
Yeah. So let me start with, you know, while I had said there's an inflection and a shift here from how we can produce more, I don't think we want to get away from the fact that the most sustainable thing that agriculture can do is to minimize the agricultural footprint. And so, you know, we at Bayer and myself are very firm believers in this idea that one of the most important paths to sustainability is agricultural intensification. So using land that is well suited for agriculture, keeping the footprint small as we can, feeding more with less on that same footprint. And so, you know, the the productivity piece, I think, is still one of the biggest contributors to the objective of how we create a sustainable food supply with a minimal carbon footprint. Having said that, I think if you look technically at what can help accelerate that, I think one, for me at least, the one I would most highlight is what I talked about earlier, which is digital. Because really the big opportunity I think that we still have in front of us is how do we help farmer customers really optimize how they use products and make decisions on the farm that are really customized to the data and the knowledge and the uniqueness of every single field that is out there. You know, it always astounds me when I look at the variability that exists on any individual field, even when we talk about places like, you know, the Midwest of the United States, where you really think that it's pretty uniform and consistent, and yet there's so much variation in those fields that we really don't fully understand, and we have to be able to harness in a different way. And so I think digital is still the key to unlocking that. It's a very challenging thing. You know, we, with our FieldView platform from Climate, you know, we are collecting data on well over 100 million acres now with our farmer customers. And that sounds like a lot. And yet at the same time, I think we're still only scratching the surface of the data requirements and the data types that are going to be needed to really unlock the full potential of what can be done. So this idea of really customizing for each individual farm and field, ultimately down to the square meter, I think is still one of the biggest single opportunities that we can in terms of sustainability, because it's really about how do you sustainably farm every one of those square meters. The second piece is maybe what you alluded to in our carbon initiative is most growers today, and obviously very crop dependent, but if you think about the big row crop producer farmers in most parts of the world, they're paid for productivity, right? It's bushels harvested, and then they're paid at a commodity price rate. And you know what's happened, and particularly we feel it a little bit in the last few years, and COVID is even exacerbating that in the near term, which is, you know, low commodity prices and difficulty with profitability for farmers in some of these major row crops. And so having farmers be rewarded financially for doing something different other than just producing yield, I think is an important element of where I think agriculture is also shifting. Whether that's going to be through policy changes in some parts of the world where you can kind of see some of that happening with potentially the Green Deal and how European growers might be recognized or rewarded, or through you know, endeavors like ours where we're helping to try to set up really a sustainable carbon market for farmers where they could be paid for doing something beyond just contributing to yield productivity. I mean, I think that's a big opportunity. And what it does is it unlocks for farmers a new way to be rewarded financially, and then for innovation companies in the innovation space to be also paid for technologies that they can help farmers to do that better with.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, obviously being a farmer, you're juggling doing more with less, dealing with the environmental challenges, trying to run a business economically as well. So having that kind of financial incentive, you know, to feed into the carbon initiative, I think is great. You know, when you think about the farmer, you know, Bob, you know, obviously you hear about all these challenges, you know, that they're dealing with. What do you think is the single biggest thing that farmers have to deal with today, and maybe, you know, how is Bayer maybe addressing, you know, the big challenge of a farmer?
Yeah, I think right now it's probably what I think we already talked about a little bit, which is particularly for those farmers that were dealing with low commodity price environments that we're kind of facing in some of the row crops is, you know, how do you maintain profitability in a low commodity environment? And I think, again, it comes back to then, you know, how can we bring innovation to the farm that I think really maximizes profitability, creates new profitability opportunities, as we talked about potentially. And then at the same time, I think they're also, I think, starting to try to address sort of more of these societal pressures. And certainly if you get into some crop areas and those that are maybe in, let's call it the fruits and vegetable spaces, right? The topic of traceability becomes more important, or, you know, how was that crop grown? And so, I think farmers are trying to address those things as well, both to create new markets for themselves as a differentiation,
Mm-hmm.
as well as then trying to just fundamentally meet and have marketable product
Mm-hmm.
in the future. And we're working on both of those ends, right? So we're working to help growers both make sure that they have markets for the products that they're developing in the horticulture space, where we have a large footprint with our crop protection business. We're working with customers every day in that field, and our vegetables seed business, where we have many, many growers, and we're very intimate with them, and they're particularly in the protected culture spaces, or with our row crop producers, where we're really trying to help them with innovation and be cost-effective producers.
Mm. I noticed from your presentation, I mean, obviously delivering innovation. I mean, you're a massive company, $20 billion company, or 19.8. You need to get that extra, 200. But how do you lead here? Or how do you do this? And how are you better than your peers? I mean, obviously, many companies are seeking to drive, solutions on sustainability and also kind of digital transformation. What do you do that is your secret sauce, if you can
Yeah.
share it?
Well, it's a sauce, and I maybe it won't be so secret. I mean, I kind of go back to you for any organization. You got to start obviously with you got to leverage your strengths, and I think one of the things that we have is that we have tremendous competency in biologics, in biology, in crop protection, biochemistry, genetics, right? So we're well positioned when it comes to harnessing those tools. So we start from that base of where our strengths are. Then I think it's really about creating clarity for our teams in terms of, what is it important that we need to be focused on? And maybe one of the earliest lessons I learned in my career was, I used to work for a company that, like many companies back in the days, had central research and development organizations, which were, sort of think tanks of science, and had tremendous scientists that were very capable. But you quickly learned that even after 30 years, many of those scientists didn't contribute a single dime to the bottom line of the business. And, agriculture, we're not like pharma. We invest, 10% of what pharmaceutical companies can. And so we really do have to be efficient if we're going to serve our customers well. So I think it's the focus on the customer, what really can matter and make a difference to them. And making sure that everything we're doing is really focused toward an outcome that's going to help them be better and more successful. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's no more than that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously startups around the world, I mean, are obviously either disrupting or changing the game, maybe moving a little bit more easily, compared to a major company like yourselves. What's your advice to, startups that are looking at the food and agriculture space in terms of where to focus, and maybe what are areas that Bayer are interested in? I know you mentioned digital, but if you could just, drill in a little bit in terms of either advice and focus for entrepreneurs, but also maybe, something that you might be interested in investing or.
Yeah, I think there's two pieces there. So one of the things we really like is to partner with companies that bring unique technologies that are something that we haven't worked on, or is something very new that then can help us do our work better. So we have many different partnerships in those kinds of spaces. As an example, we started a JV called Earth, which it takes advantage of a technology called ProTac. So it's a protein targeting technology for our crop protection space. Those kinds of innovations that then a company like ours can leverage in our core programs, I think those are outstanding collaboration opportunities and spaces, and hopefully are good partnerships for the startups and for companies like ourselves that then can really use those technologies to bring value to the market.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one I think is areas where maybe we are not as focused or heavily invested in. So certain market spaces, new market opportunities, there's a lot of interest in some new crops because of some of the potential shifts that people see in things like protein consumption, as an example, or other kinds of new markets where we may not have the same level of focus. And I think innovation companies have an opportunity there. And then new technical spaces, which could create whole new streams, which maybe Bayer doesn't actually participate in, but complements what we're trying to do with farmers. And I think about the biologic space as an example where we do have partnerships in that space, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's good to see that there's an ecosystem there as well, where there are other companies attempting to bring new solutions to the market that I think are complementary to at the core of what we also do. So, I think those are the kinds of things. My
Yeah.
advice always to startups is, you know, if you have a good idea, have an even better business plan. So,
Yeah. Very good advice. Obviously, look, this global pandemic, I mean, it's hard to imagine we're in August already. I think, you know, when we were sitting back in November or March, we thought this would be finished in a couple of months. It's probably one of the biggest impacts in this century for all of us. But for the food supply chain, it's really kind of highlighted weaknesses in the supply chain and some of the challenges there. You know, in your view, I mean, what are we learning from this? And what should we be applying to the future from what we're seeing? And then maybe a little bit behind the scenes in terms of Bayer, how are you guys dealing with this? And maybe any silver linings, or I know you're hanging out in St. Louis, so that's obviously a silver lining for you.
yeah. I think from the macro perspective, it kind of is a bit of a wake-up call to the vulnerability that potentially exists in, you know, the food supply system. I think we've been fortunate so far that we haven't seen actually more of a bit of a, I'll call it a bit of a food or supply chain crisis with food in some parts of the world, because I think there was some early speculation that COVID was really going to negatively impact that. It certainly highlighted the importance of things like, you know, agriculture is highly dependent on labor.
Mm-hmm.
And where we've probably seen the biggest disruption in agriculture are in those segments where there's high labor market need. And it's just been disruptive to the supply chain. And so we've seen that. The other side effect, I think, has been, which is a bit of a wake-up call, is the importance of certain markets for the business of agriculture. So if you look in the US, for example, nobody's driving because so many people are staying home and working from home. And so gasoline consumption is way down, which has had a big negative impact on ethanol production and ethanol consumption, which then has translated into significantly lower corn prices in the US for the near term. So, you know, I don't think none of us, I think, would have anticipated some of these consequences. And I think it's a reflection and wake-up call that, okay, well, this has happened with this instance. What other kind of disruptions could disrupt agriculture in a different way? You know, one that I always look still to is we have been fortunate that we really haven't had what I call a serious climactic event that has had a big disruptive effect on some of the food supply. You know, in some ways we have a very resilient food supply globally, but in another sense, it's very vulnerable because every year is different. And I worry, you know, I often worry about that. And then the last one I'd say real quickly is COVID is also a reminder that biology evolves around us in ways that we don't understand and always can control. And we have many parallels when you think about the locust infestation in Africa that's been happening, or in Asia, the situation that we see with the expansion and development of pests like fall armyworm. I mean, these are real problems. You know, I still remember that soybean rust didn't exist in Brazil. And today it is a pervasive part of what farmers have to deal with every day in the soybean crop there. So, you know, this is the thing we have to watch, is that biology is always around us and it's always changing and not always to our benefit. And then maybe on the, you know, how has it affected Bayer? Well, besides obviously having a little bit of a suppressive effect on the ag market looking ahead, which many of us and our peers groups are talking about, is, you know, we're also all learning what it's like to work differently. We're certainly saving quite a bit of travel money right now. And we're learning to work differently with, you know, working from home and a lot more of the digital interconnection. I think, you know, it's going to have a permanent effect, I think, to some degree on how we work. At the same time, I think we do feel that innovation still is going to require some human-to-human contact. So how we balance that all together in the future and what it all translates into, I think it remains to be seen a little bit. But there's no doubt that this is going to create a bit of a permanent shift for Bayer and how we work.
Yeah, I think, and for all of us, I think, I mean, there's certainly some challenges, but at the same time, I think that you know, the ability to be able to transact and do business over video, you know, just like this, you know, today, and open up to a global audience is a nice thing to be able to do, rather than spending a lot of time on flights and travel. Maybe one last question, Bob, before we go into looking at some of our polls. You know, you talk about convergence around your leading R&D platforms, you know, season traits, crop protection, digital farming. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like in the future, and maybe from a farmer's perspective, what they can expect. And, you know, and again, if there's anything you might be able to share with us about what could that look like, what could we see from Bayer in the future?
Yeah. I think in the next few years, how it will evolve, and we've talked quite a bit about this, which is we use the term tailored solutions, which is really vernacular for saying, how do you bring pieces of what you just described together in a way that's more beneficial for the farmer? And in the near term, at least, what it really will translate into is, you know, we're working very diligently right now, for example, on how do we help a farmer make a better seed selection decision? You know, what field should what particular variety go on, and you know, and at what planting density, and how should it be planted? And you know, you'd like to continue to evolve that to, well, what's the nutritional program that goes with that? What's the best pest and weed management program that goes with the selection that you've now made? And so that idea of tailoring, or you know, really tuning the offering to the grower for every individual field and situation, I think is where we're headed, in a data-driven way, right? Because today we make those decisions. A farmer today is making those decisions, but they're primarily driven based on past experience, maybe some advice that they're getting from a trusted advisor, but it candidly is not as data-driven as it really could be. And I think that's really the big paradigm shift, and why the digital piece is so critical. That will evolve more and more to becoming both more precise as we learn and know how to harness that data more effectively. But it'll also become, I would say, more multifactorial. So today it might be, you know, here you have a fungal disease you need to manage in this crop, and I'm going to optimize how you use that crop protection product by providing better guidance on where and when you should spray. Tomorrow, that might now include the choice of what genetics you put into that field to go with it, that might have some element of disease tolerance already as well. And so you kind of complement the fungicide with the genetics together with the advice. And then, as I said, the genetics will influence things like the nutritional requirements of that crop. Maybe it's water requirements, other things. And so, you know, you can see how eventually you'd like to layer more and more complexity onto this. Of course, the more complex it gets, the more data you're going to need to really make it meaningful and impactful, and something that the farmer will value. And then the last part, I think, is a little bit early days, but something that we're working on and experimenting with, which is, does this also change a little bit of the way farmers purchase? So, you know, today, most companies, we sell products to farmers, and the farmer basically buys those products and takes on all the risk and the benefit of purchasing them. And so the question is risk sharing with a farmer, and sharing potentially differently in the value proposition with the grower, where risk may be now more co-shared. So we talk about this idea of outcome-based pricing, or other types of models where the grower transaction with a company like ours is different. And it's one where we have much more intimate involvement with the decision-making of the grower, because we have a much bigger vested interest in it. Creates more certainty for the grower. And certainty obviously is a very valuable attribute for the grower, and hopefully also our knowledge and insights provide upside. So those are some of the things that we're working on, I think, that are, I would say, different, and going to really, I would say, shape, I think, how some of the future of ag looks.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Bob. It's great conversation. And why don't we take a look at the polls and see how these answers are shaping up here, if everybody wants to take a look at those. So our first question was, which of the following agriculture advances would you say has the biggest impact on sustainability? I don't know if you can see that there, Bob, at the moment.
Looks like they agree with me.
Yeah. Yeah. So precision ag, obviously, that's coming out on top, but very closely with soil conservation practices.
And I would say that all of the answers below are going to be potential contributors to the precision ag topic, right? Soil conservation practices are going to be influenced by how we can do that in a different way, in a way that's data driven. Microbials, we touched on that, how that could have a positive effect on what we're trying to accomplish, et cetera. So these all tie together clearly.
Yeah. And the second question, which of the following do you believe would most stimulate innovation in ag? I see just about getting there is cross-sector collaboration.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's a testament to the fact that I think every one of us recognizes that there's no single group, company, entity, organization, government that can solve some of these broad challenges on its own. And we're just, as I point out, we don't have the same level of investment and fund, despite the criticality of food. It's really ironic, isn't it? Despite the criticality of food, we do shockingly a lot with shockingly a little. And we're going to have to continue to do that. And I think collaboration and partnerships are just going to continue to be very key for how we deliver on the commitment that I think ag has to do for society.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, obviously that second answer is obviously kind of aligning in there as well in terms of public-private sector, investment.
Yeah.
I mean, just maybe how do you see something like that coming about, in terms of that, a solution here in terms of this area with public?
Well, yeah, the public-private piece.
Yeah.
It's growing in importance, I would say. And part of the reason I think is because of what you have there listed as the first two. I think one of the struggles we've been having, and we're a perfect poster child, I would say, a little bit for this, unfortunately, which is consumer trust and policy impacts, right, and regulation impacts. They're impacting how and what we can do in our industry. We continue to see changes in regulations, and it's hard to plan a business when you don't know what the future is going to, what you're going to be able to do in the future. And I think the sentiment is that if we're going to influence in a positive way consumer trust or regulation in a way that we would like to influence to be more scientifically driven and less politically driven, these partnerships, particularly public sector partnerships, are a good way potentially of having, I would say, a better seat at the table and influencing the conversation. It's without naming names, I'll give you a bit of a distressing conversation that recently transpired where there was a discussion about an approval for a product in Europe, and one of the individuals on the line from the European side, European government side, has said, well, we don't want to be approving things that are going to further exasperate all of this agriculture that's not sustainable and not, we hear that, there's all of this, all of these things that are negatively affecting conservation, tillage, and other things in the U.S. market. And it's just a gross misunderstanding of agriculture and what's really transpiring and what's science-based and what's not, right?
Right.
And I think that's where our opportunity in these public-private sector partnerships is, that I think this is a different way of maybe getting the conversation in a place that I think is more scientifically sound, more hopefully balanced, and more influential.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I know from the innovation agenda with the Secretary Perdue and the USDA, there's definitely a strong interest to really kind of pursue this public-private initiatives and investment. So maybe if we go to our questions, you can click the Q&A and you can kind of see the top questions, and I'll tell folks if you want to upvote any of those, you can take a look at them. Alex Duplessis, mainly I'm interested in payments for ecosystem services and especially payments for carbon sequestration. What is Bayer doing? I think you talked a little bit about that, and planning to do. What models work?
Well, I think that's what model is going to work is a great question. I think a model that works is one that there's a market that is sustainable and predictable, and one that there's I would say a clear value share back to the farmer, so that the farmer is being recognized for what they're doing. And so I think what we're trying to do is, how do we help to bridge those two things, which is we have connectivity and intimacy with farmer customers, and we have tools that are capable of helping to, I would say, measure and verify the behaviors that the farmer is doing that are then, for in this instance, say, sequestering more carbon. And what we need to link that to is what I believe is a demand there for particularly carbon offsets. So if we can link these two things together, then I think we're creating a market, and we're creating somebody that can service that market in a value-added way. And I think once we do that, and that is recognized and sustainable, then I think it opens up the further innovation opportunity in that space. But what I said sounds easy. What I said sounds simple. It's probably not that easy. And so we are going to need partnerships. We've been collaborating quite a bit just on the question alone of modeling. How do you model and come to a consensus on what the definition is that a particular farm in a particular set of management practices is contributing to carbon sequestration, and then when isn't it, and how much is it contributing, et cetera, so that if you make additional changes, are you having a positive or negative effect? And we have to get alignment on all these things in order for this to really work and operate. So much more work to come. A lot of enthusiasm, I would say, a lot of interest from parties that would like to, I would say, pay farmers for doing something that I think farmers would welcome participating in.
Okay, great. I have another question. Jonathan Jackson, hang on, where has that gone? Okay, he's gone to the top. What specifically is Bayer doing to help regenerative ag efforts that are stalled in implementation in the US?
Yeah, and again, I think maybe one of the biggest things we can do is maybe on the topic we just talked about here, which is that one of the biggest keys to conservation tillage, which is one of the biggest farm practices that a farmer can deploy in terms of carbon sequestration and contribute to, I think, what people allude to when they describe regenerative agriculture. Those best soil management practices are really key to carbon sequestration. So if we can get farmers to be rewarded financially for that, so that'll be our piece of how we can help in particular, then I think we're making a very positive impact on that space. The other piece is, of course, we are heavily engaged in research in areas like biologicals, which we also think have an important innovation role to play in how soil health develops, is built, and sustained. One of the things, though, I will say, and I don't want this to sound in a way that doesn't recognize the importance of this space, because it is really critical. It is very challenging because, one of the lessons I learned many years ago is, prairie soils had substantially higher organic matter. And when we began to plow soils like that in the Midwest, when, settlers came in and turned that into farmland, the amount of organic matter lost was substantial. Trying to recover that takes decades with proper farm management practice. So it's easy to lose and it's hard to gain back is really the lesson. So I do think we have to really have a good focus on it and leverage all the tools that we can. And that includes good management practices and systems that help promote that.
Thanks, Bob. Nagu Adhurtha, I'm interested in more about digital farming and how it's going to change the future agriculture, especially in countries like India, as Bayer Crop Science is also one of the top players in agri-input industry in India. What's your take on this?
Yeah, a fantastic question. And honestly, maybe one of the most challenging questions I'm going to probably face today, because in one sense, I think it's a huge opportunity, right? Because I think the piece of digital agriculture is it's about knowledge. And the challenge you face with smallholders is that, unlike in large farms, the data collection is a big, big challenge. And so, I think we've still got a lot of work to do to figure out how do you collect data appropriately from smallholder farmers and then turn that back into something that's creating value. Having said that, smallholders benefit from the fact that a way to reach millions of farmers is through digital. And so it's also you know, it's kind of also a unique tool in that sense, is that it's a great tool to reach, but reaching them is one thing. Providing them with something that really creates value is the thing that I think we have to keep focusing on. I think our strategy has shifted a little bit. We started with a product called FarmRise that we developed and was deployed in India and other countries. And what we tried to do there is provide simple things like, where's a good market for my particular product, right? One where I maybe don't realize that a village a few kilometers away may be a better, higher priced market than the one I'm locally selling in. So providing smallholder farmers with better understanding and information about markets. We provide some, you know, fundamental agronomic advice on how to grow certain vegetable crops, as an example. I think where we're going to try to shift this a little bit is I think farmers need more than just things like that a single input provider may be focused on. Farming and smallholder world, I think, is a lot more about things like access to credit, access to markets, access to technology in a way that allows them not just to put a big risk out, but risk management. So I think what we need to bring in is other partners. Those could be financial partners, equipment partners, other technology companies together to, I think, help solve some additional challenges that are very unique for smallholders, because they don't have the wherewithal to make big fundamental technical shifts, because their risk, you know, their ability to take on risk is just a completely different profile than other farmers. So if I tell them to do something different, you know, they maybe want to do it, but they can't. And we have to remove those barriers. And I think partnerships are going to be a key element of that.
I know the questions are flying in here, Bob, so you're obviously very popular. Let me just get the next one here. Zinil Lim, smallholder farmers produce 70 to 80% of the world's food. How does Bayer work with smallholder farmers to digitize and increase productivity?
So we talked a little bit about some of our early efforts on the digitizing productivity piece, which is, again, right now, you know, it's limited to how we provide markets or some agronomic advice. You know, we obviously work every day in some crops in terms of helping them with input products. You know, we have a very large crop protection business, particularly in Asia and in Africa, where we support farmers with specific solutions for their insect and weed problems and disease problems. And then in some crops in Asia, we, of course, have extensive seed businesses. And you know, the one I'd highlight in particular is that has been new for me to learn about and is really exciting is hybrid rice, which, you know, is not the largest segment of the rice market in Asia, but it's a growing one. And I think a really, you know, huge opportunity to help smallholder farmers that are rice farmers in parts of the world, particularly in Southeast Asia and in India. So those are some of the ways we're touching them. We're continuing to refine our strategy, and I would say that what we're really looking to do is how do we further, I would say, do a better job of really optimizing offerings for smallholders that are a little different maybe than what we did in the past, where, you know, historically companies like ours often, you know, we'd launch products in large markets, and then we take those same products and then we offer them to smallholder farmers. And I think you have to be a little, I think this is the era of customization. I think we have to be more customized with our offerings, whether that's a simple crop protection product or it's a seed product. I think customization is really important in this market segment as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. One last question from Amar Kawaja. I'm not doing a good job with the pronunciation there. Soil is considered the largest sequester of carbon, but industrial agriculture has caused loss of soil health and thus has declined sequestration values. What are you doing to remediate soil health?
Well, I challenge that statement, because the best conservation tillage operations are actually on large farm operations, particularly if you look at places like Brazil, who've really taken advantage of the fact that systems like the Roundup Ready system have really allowed them to go to no-till situations, which is, again, one of the most important elements of carbon sequestration on the farm. So I kind of push back a little bit and say that there's big farmers are actually doing a pretty good job, but they can do a lot more, and there's a lot more to do across all farms of all sizes. And as I said, I think the opportunity is how do we further both educate farmers to help them know what the right thing to do is, and then how do we financially get them to be recognized and rewarded? And that will really accelerate the opportunity there. And I think that's where we're really focused.
Excellent. Bob, thank you for, I mean, obviously all these questions coming at you left, right, and center. None of these were prepped, but thank you for jumping in here. And also, really, it's been really enlightening and very interesting to see what you're doing at Bayer, you know, shaping the future of agriculture. I mean, it's clear that sustainability is high on the agenda, and really kind of focusing around the consolidation of your platforms is really kind of interesting. So, and exciting to see your big view on digital as being the big thing that's going to help us along the way. So, thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for being with us today, and look forward to keeping the dialogue going with you.
All right. Well, again, John, thanks very much for the invitation, for everybody that joined us today. You know, we need to create a big tent for agriculture. We're all part of this. I think that's one of the beautiful things of working in a space like ag is it's a space where I think while there's competition like any other industry or any other area, we're the ones that are most going to be successful through collaboration and partnership. And I would say also helping to fuel innovation in all different places. Nobody's going to solve this on its own, and we just want to be part of helping the entire ecosystem be successful.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bob. And maybe Jess, if you want to put up our last couple of slides. So again, thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like to engage with us, either as a corporate partner, or if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing, our global challenges, we'll be rolling these out over the course of the next month in various different parts of the world. So please connect with us online. And our next speakers, we've got in October, we've got a great lineup from leadership from Kubota, Yamaha, two hot robotic companies, Abundant Robotics and Tortuga AgTech. We're going to do a panel on the autonomous acre and the future of robotics in the 21st century. So please join us for that. And I'd like to thank Bob and the team. I know Claudia and your team were very helpful to us in setting this up. Thank you. And also I'd like to thank my team, Jess, Helen, and the team for all your work in making this happen. And hope everybody keeps well, keeps safe, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Are we off the air?